Genesis chapter 22, the one verse 5. I will be reading from the King James Version. And it reads, "And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and come again to you." Let us read it again. "And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and come again to you." We'd like to speak this morning from the question, will you worship or will you abide with the ass? Will you worship or will you abide with the ass? May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. The German reformer Martin Luther has many famous sayings. One of the more famous that we hear quite often, Deacon Hart, is "Let the church be the church." And King Solomon, I know you love me and I love you. But one of my private hurts as a pastor is that when it's time for the church to be the church, not everybody who claims to be in the company of the believers acts as the church. There have been a many day I have sat in the back office with Deacon Sandals. And as he looks back over his years of worship in this church, and he looks at the different times when the church was being the church, there were certain voices, Deacon Hart, that you might hear on a Sunday morning, but when it was time for the church to be the church, you didn't hear them. Yes, sir. All right. Come on, brother. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Go ahead, Dad. Go ahead. When it was really time for us to be what God has called us to be. Like at the Mill Street Makeover, if you're looking for an example, that's the example he gave to me. He brought out how when it was really time for us to be who God has called us to be, we lamented that certain voices could no longer be heard. I pray for you, Sister Todd. I pray for you, Sister Early. I pray for you, Downtown Brown and family. I pray for you, Sister Sarah Daniels. I pray for each of you who are new, Bobby Mallard, to this fellowship, that you would learn to worship rather than merely abiding with the ass. Yes, sir. Come on. Yes. Come on, Pastor. You gonna stay and keep the stuff while the rest of us are worshiping. Yes, sir. What passes for worship this day and age is nothing more than rehearsed rhetoric. Now, Deacon Hard, this may hurt your feelings to hear, but only a few who gather to worship actually worship. Now, ain't nobody denying, Brother Kelly, that we gather, we give, we sing, we preach, we come to the altar. Some of us even testify. But if you leave here with Isaac, if you've not offered God Isaac, who is Isaac? Isaac is the ass that keep you from worshiping. If you leave here with Isaac, mad because I talked about the mayor, and all you've done is talk about Trump ever since November 20th. Your black skin is your Isaac.
All right.
Some of us have not approached the mountain. Instead, you remain with the ass. While others, Janet Samuel, representing the church, the people of God, we approached God in worship. Can I just talk in here? Deacon Hart, that's why they say we crazy. Because we don't stay with the ass. See, it's only good, logical, common sense to stay with the ass. Ain't no trouble in staying with the ass. But if you're going to go up the mountain and you're going to take Isaac with you and you're going to approach God, they say that's nuts. And here's why, Sister Sarah Thompson. To worship is to understand, Colonel Stamps, this notion of sacrifice. Having a relationship with God is more than just standing at the foot of the mountain. It is about entering the very presence of God. Why? Because you can pay the price of admission.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Some of us don't want to go up the mountain, Dr. Thompson, because it will cost us Isaac.
Yes, sir. Yes.
And so we just stay at the foot of the mountain, chirping with that ass. Now, this particular historical event took place over 4,000 years ago, Brother Miller, and most of us, we're very familiar with the passage, and yet it remains one of the more misinterpreted and underinterpreted passages in the book of Genesis. And there are two reasons for this. First of all, the passage comes to us steeped in Old Testament types and symbols. An accurate understanding of the Old Testament requires an understanding of the entire Bible. Listen, my sisters and my brothers, it also comes to us clothed in the Old English of the King James Version. So the modern reader immediately discounts what he reads because the language is not language that he uses every day. What I'm trying to say is that we find it hard to draw conclusions for our own life based on old facts from an ancient time, clothed in a language and a religious system that we don't understand. Why, after all, the modern mind reasons, why would God even ask Abraham to sacrifice his son? You see, the modern mind views child sacrifice as proof of our pagan past. But in the historical setting of Genesis chapter 22, here it is. God was testing or proving Abraham. God has given you middle class black folk and Isaac. The Isaac is somebody of something of great value. In their old age, Abraham was 100, Sarah was 90. In their old age, God blessed them with Isaac. Isaac was called the child of promise. God promised Abraham in Genesis 12 and 2 that he would make him a, quote, great nation. The Lord also promised Abraham in Genesis 15 and 5, and this is also why we don't really understand the Bible like we should. We hate to read. We come to church, we don't bring our Bibles. Turn your mind off because we want the preacher to hoop us happy. And there you are standing at the foot of the mountain with your ass. Promised Abraham in Genesis 15 and 5 that his descendants would rival the number of stars in the heavens. God made him a promise. And according to Genesis 18 and 11, at the time the promises were made, Abraham and Sarah were already old and well stricken with age, long past the age of childbearing. In fact, according to Genesis 18 and 12, Sarah laughed and asked the question, how could a worn-out woman like me have a child? God heard her and asked the question of Genesis 18 and 14, because a lot of us, we want to know why, and how. And so the Lord asked her a question, is anything too hard for the Lord? And then God doubled down. He said about a year from now, Sarah will have a son. So Isaac was the child of promise and was born right on schedule. Now fast forward, Sister Philana Brown, 25 years from the birth of Isaac. In this passage, Abraham is now 125 years old, and his 25-year-old son Isaac are headed to what will presumably be Isaac's death. And Abraham calls it worship. It was the testing ground. You do understand, you can go on a journey and get to the mountain. The test is, are you coming up it? Because that's where the real worshipers are. That's where the church becomes the church. When I really, mother, came rolling, got to sacrifice Isaac. You don't know how to worship if it is not through your faith being tested. Abraham was being asked to sacrifice his child of promise in an act that was reserved not for the people of God, but for their pagan neighbors. Now that's the historical setting. Now let me give you the contemporary setting. This day and age, are you listening? A man will sacrifice half his pension, give it to his ex-wife, just so he can divorce her and marry his mistress. This day and age, a man will lie on a table, risk his own health to give his kidney to save his daughter's life. In the time in which we now live, a woman will spend all she has purchasing a fine home and decorating it with the best that money can buy. In this day and age, a woman will go to the floating unit, spend several $1,000s a month gambling, and don't think nothing of it. Spend so much money, the casino will send a limo to pick you up. In our day and time, I gave you the historical setting. I'm giving you the contemporary setting now. Men and women will raise hundreds of thousands of dollars for the NAACP. They'll pay their dues, raise money for their lodge, their sorority, or fraternity. They are aware even after that boy was killed over in Louisiana, black folks still making new lines.
All right. Yes, sir.
You wear your paraphernalia. And I want to scream out, Lee Bernard, murderer. That's what I want to scream out. Murderer. They wear their paraphernalia. Allow their names to be used in support of their bras and sorrows. They'll give their time for blood drives, pick up litter from highways, serve dinner to the homeless on holidays. I'm just talking about what people do in the contemporary setting now. They'll buy tags to support their alumni association, pay dues into these associations, go before political boards to get grants and funding for their particular schools. They will even write letters to the editors and lend their support in whatever way they can. Why do you say all this, preacher? Here it is, Deacon Hart. The issue today is that if we ask you to do the same thing for God, can you hear me in the back? That's what the issue is, Sister Todd.
Yes, sir.
Right now today, this morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, if we ask the church to do for God what you have done for others and for yourself while having the same generous attitude.
Yes, sir.
Even though I remember when Daddy was dying and you asked, if he need a lung, I'll give him a lung. If he need a kidney, I'll give him a kidney. But what we want to know is if the church need a lung. If the church need a kidney. Will you see what I'm asking for, Lana Brown? What I'm asking, Sister Todd? What I'm saying, Sister Early, is that it's a lot of folk, Brother Mallard, who are in the church, but they hadn't come up the mountain. They are down there at the foot of the mountain, standing with the ass. But when it's time to worship, they won't come up the mountain, even though they have made the same or similar sacrifices for others. But when it's time to do it for the church,
Yes, sir.
Dr. Thompson, I ain't asked yet. Unfold your arms. I ain't asked yet. I ain't got to the part where you fold your arms. I'm coming to that part. I'm going to make you fold them in a second, but not yet. When we ask, Brother Philippian, for the church, will you have the same generous attitude?
Yes, sir.
Same generous attitude, Sister Baker? Or will you come up with all kind of excuses? In other words, I'd rather stay with the ass. Y'all go on up there and deal with Isaac. I'm going to stay down here and watch the stuff. This brings me to my first point. Sister Todd, hear it and hear it well. Modern day men and women ain't going to sacrifice for God. Sister Hart, God know this. I know this. And you know this. And the reason we're not going to sacrifice for God, we've not learned the contemporary lesson from Genesis chapter 22. God asked Abraham to sacrifice, which Abraham saw as me being devoted and worshiping you.
Yes, sir. Wow. Yes.
Why hadn't I ever worshiped? Sister Sandals, because true sacrifice and worship is born out of utter devotion to God and not to temple, as in Rosa A. Temple, and not to Alcorn, and not to Jackson State, and not to Linear High School, but utter devotion to God. And it's not done as something to impress Negroes.
Yes, sir.
Abraham wasn't trying to impress man. Abraham was showing his faith in God. But some of us middle class folk, we want to impress man. Faith ain't faith, Dr. Thompson, unless something of value to you is put at risk. Can I talk in here? Because see, I know some of y'all worry about me running folk off from church and all this kind of stuff. Well, let me tell you, Sister Sandals, the church was never mine. It's always been the Lord's. And just because a Negro in the church don't mean he going up the mountain. The majority of y'all stand around to watch the asses. When it's time to worship, you ain't coming. When it's time to count the soldiers that's getting ready to go to war for the Lord, you will sing about it. I'm on the battlefield. But when it's time to stand up and for the church to be the church, when I look back, it's a lot of folk I don't see. Are you with me, Sister Todd? Because the time is coming now where you're going to have to really worship and sacrifice for the Lord. And I love you. And I want to be able to look back and see. I don't want you to be down there with the ass.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
My sisters and my brothers, if you've not put anything of value to risk this morning, you are still abiding with the ass. For example, most of the giving in our churches, it ain't sacrificial giving. We just pay God off. So we can do what we want to do with the rest of the money. Did you hear me? Giving went up, Deacon Hart, during COVID because many were making guilt payments because they knew they should have been in church. Listen now, y'all know I ain't scared of running folk off from church, right? Because if you ain't studying about God, you ain't studying about me either. And I ain't going to waste my energy doing flips for you. But I will preach to you. That's not the true spirit of sacrificial giving. A man will stop drinking Cokes for a month and say he's sacrificing. It's Lent. Give up sweets and bread for a month and call it fast. No, Negro, you need to lose some weight. That's a diet. It's not fasting. What I'm trying to say, Deacon Hard, is that most of us, we don't know the meaning of godly sacrifice. Talking about what you went through for your child. Good. What did you go through for Christ?
All right. Yes, sir.
I'm just asking now. Somebody told me to ask. I'm asking for a friend. 21st century Sarah Daniels, godly sacrifice. In other words, when I come up the mountain to approach God, it entails three things. It exalts Christ, it demonstrates my trust in God, and it leads others to the faith.
Yes, sir.
This brings me to my second point, Sister Mallard. Here it is. Sacrifice. It exalts Christ. Do you think y'all pay me enough to let Negroes persecute me like they do? Tear my name down?
Good now.
It's for Christ. Studying these raggedy Negroes. The Old Testament notion of sacrifice is steeped in shadows and types. Once the shadows and types are removed, we can see Jesus Christ all over the Old Testament. Isaac was a type of Christ. He was the child of promise, just as Jesus is the Messiah that was promised so long ago. At the time of this sacrificial offering, Isaac was no mere child. Scholars estimate he had to be at least 25. What are you saying, Deaconess Fairley? What I'm saying is this. Isaac would have had to give his consent. Ain't no 125-year-old man finna bind a 25-year-old man unless he give his consent. His Historically, child sacrifice was never performed without the consent of the one being sacrificed. It had to be a willing sacrifice. Abraham could not bind the younger man without the younger man's consent. Note that it was Isaac in verse 6 who carried the wood. When Isaac asked the question about the lamb in verse 7, it was because he and his father never expected him to be slain, or if he were slain, he would have been immediately raised. Abraham told his servants in verse 5, New Living Translation, we going to worship. And he didn't say, I'm coming back. He said, we'll be back. It was never the expectation that God would allow Isaac to be sacrificed and then not raise him. In other words, Isaac for us is a shadow or figure of Christ who would willingly lay down his life. I'm not trying to blackmail you to go up the mountain. I'm saying go up the mountain because of what Christ did for you. Can I preach in here? I'm not trying to shame you into doing nothing. This ain't a Negro psychology class. I'm saying you ought to see what Christ has done. And his sacrifice ought to move you to leave that ass alone. Is it all right to preach in here? I need you to hear it now. Abraham is the picture of God the Father, who would give us his only begotten Son, the Son through whom the promise, the proto-evangelium would come. The sacrifice was to take place in a land called Moriah. Moriah, a few hundreds of years later, would later become known as Jerusalem. They were in Jerusalem. Abraham and Isaac went 3 days' journey to an ancient mountain called Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah in later centuries would mark the spot where Solomon's temple would be built. You know, the temple where Jesus went in turning over tables hadn't been built yet, but that was the spot where they were going to build it. And a nearby mountain would become known as Mount Calvary, where Jesus would be crucified. When Abraham renamed the place Jehovah-Jireh in verse 14, it was looking forward to the time when the Lord would provide his own lamb at Mount Calvary. But looking back from our time, we can readily see that Abraham's sacrifice exalted Christ. Sacrificial giving this day and age must exalt the Lord Jesus Christ. Can I talk in here? Now, how is it we're going to have a funeral in God's house, but we're going to bury you in Jackson State, blue and white? We're going to have members of the Sonic Boom here playing. See, that's that ass talk. See, you ain't sacrificed nothing. Because when you sacrifice, everything you do, even your death, is going to exalt Christ. Can I preach in here? I need you to hear it now. It cannot be about self. If you're on the mountain approaching God, you ought to be bringing somebody or something to sacrifice. You don't show up to worship with no sacrifice. If you do, you're just standing with the ass. Some of us are standing with the very ass that you should be sacrificing. In other words, the thing you ought to sacrifice, Sister Mallon, is the very thing that's keeping you from going that last mile of the way, Sister Robbins. See, Sister Robbins, it took you 20 years to sacrifice that ass, but you did it. Standing there at the foot of the mountain, you know what it is that keeps you from going up the mountain and having an encounter with God? What have you given personally so that Christ will be exalted? In other words, what has this worship cost you? This brings me to my third point, Brother Disco. Sacrificial giving demonstrates a radical trust, Sister Early, in God. Don't bake me no cake. Don't cook me no dinner. Don't buy me no suit. Don't buy me no shoes. But you need to do something that demonstrates a radical trust in the Lord. If you want to get close to God, you got to